I'd like to start things off this week by apologizing for getting my video out so late. I know I normally launch them on Saturdays, but Mondays are a little more convenient for me as it turns out. And I was also out of town this past week, or at least a good portion of it, and didn't get a chance to record my video ahead of time like I had planned. So in the future, expect videos to be coming out around 6 p.m. Central Time on Mondays. So yeah, this week we're going to be talking about creating and deploying a PolymerJS Firebase application. We're going to be hosting through Firebase. Our application is going to be built using Polymer, and most of the stuff we're going to be talking about here is configuration and getting our deployment set up. So let's just dive right in. To start things off, I'm at the Firebase console now. You can get to this by going to firebase.google.com and checking out the console in the top right corner after you've logged in. You can also hit it directly by going to console.firebase.google.com. I don't have any projects configured for this account, so that cleans things up. On my other account, I have everything else that I normally use, but I hit my quota limit on that one, so I had to switch over to my other Google account, which is fine for now since I'm just going to create a project to show things off and delete it. And then from this point forward, we'll be using my portfolio application, which is using Firebase for any of my future videos. But I'm going to walk you through the steps to create a quick demo project on here. So you just click Add Project and go ahead and create your project name. So in this case, we're going to call it a Polymer Firebase demo. It's going to go ahead and generate a project ID for you. You can edit this to change it to be whatever you want. I'm just going to leave it as is for now. Go ahead and leave it in the United States region and click Create Project. This is going to go ahead and spin up our Firebase instance, as well as give us all the credentials we're going to need to authenticate our application against it. Now that our project's been created, we can head over to the Develop tab and you can see all the different functionality that we're going to have access to here. To start things off, I'm going to go ahead and set up authentication. So you set up a sign in method, and then you get to choose what ones you want to use out of the box. I'm just going to set it up for Google for now. So we're going to go ahead and let it configure, enable, and then save. That's really all it's needed to set up the configuration when you're using Firebase auth. So next we're going to need to modify our authorized domains. In this case, we're just going to add 127.0.0.1, which is going to be the localhost that we're using when we're serving using Polymer Serve. In general, for your production apps, you're probably not going to want that in there, but since we're going to be locking down the securities, I'm not too worried about it in the future. If you have additional domains, such as in my portfolio website, I'm using amscripting.com, so I'd have to add those authorized domains here as well, otherwise users wouldn't be able to log in on those domains. Next up, we need to configure our hosting. So we're going to go ahead and hop over to the hosting section and click Get Started. At this point, it's going to walk you through the basics on how to set up your configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and skip past this, and I'll show you the command run for it in a second. But these are the important commands here. Once you have the CLI installed, you're going to need to log in as your account and go ahead and init the Firebase, and then later you can deploy. So I'm going to hop over to my console now and show you those steps as well. Next up, we're going to go ahead and install the Firebase tools. This is going to be installed through npm, and we're going to go ahead and install it globally. This is what we're going to use to log into Firebase and create our Firebase initial project. After the command finishes running, we're going to go ahead and log in through the Firebase login command, at which point you should get a modal that pops up. If it doesn't pop up, you can always go to the URL provided. Now that we've authenticated through Firebase, we're ready to get started on initializing our project. To start things off, we're going to have to create a new directory to put our project in, and then we're going to need to change directory into that project folder. Once we're done with that, we can go ahead and run the Firebase init command, which is going to ask us a series of questions that will let us set up our project. To start things off, we're going to need to choose what CLI features we want to use. I'm just going to do database and hosting for this demo, but in the portfolio, I'm also using functions. After that, we're going to go ahead and need to choose the project that we want to run against, which is the one we created previously. Set a database rules location, which I just used the default. And then we're going to need to set up our public directory. This is the assets that actually get deployed. So we're going to need to use the build/ES5 bundled, which is going to be the build that we're using for deploying here. Then we need to enable single page application rewrite for the URLs. After that, we're good to start creating our Polymer project. So we're going to use the Polymer init command, just like we did in the AWS example. And we're going to want to use the Polymer 2 starter kit. This is going to go ahead and install everything that we need, and then we can get started on our application from this point forward. Once we've got our project initialized, we're going to go ahead and install the polymerfire elements from the Firebase repository on Git. Once this is done, we'll be able to use a bunch of helper Polymer elements that were created by the Firebase team in order to make our lives a little bit easier. Then we're going to go ahead and serve our application so we can get things started within our code base. The first code edits that we're going to be making are to the build section of our PolymerJS file. To start things off, I'm just going to remove all of the builds that aren't necessary to the actions we're going to be performing, which is going to speed up our Polymer build command quite a bit. In this case, I just care about the ES5 bundled preset, which is provided to us through the Polymer build process. So I'm just going to remove everything else, and then we're going to be using this to deploy in the future. Next up, we're going to be editing our package.json file. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the script section within this file. We're going to be adding 2 new commands to simplify our life later on. And this is going to be the deploy and deploy::hosting commands. What this does is in both cases, it runs the Polymer build using the configuration file we edited previously, and then chains that into the Firebase deploy command. In the case of deploy, it's going to go ahead and deploy the entirety of our application. This will include things like changes to our database rules and all our cloud functions. In the second case, it's going to deploy just the front-end assets for hosting. This is going to allow us to go ahead and make quick changes to our front-end application that's not going to affect anything else when we deploy it. Now that we've finished editing our configuration and getting everything set up to run the build later, we're going to go ahead and start working on the code. I keep all of my Firebase app configuration stuff within my app shell, so it's always there and ready no matter what endpoint I end up on. In this case, I'm also going to be running auth out of the Firebase base shell. So we're going to start things off by going ahead and running the imports for both Firebase app and Firebase auth using the polymerfire group of elements that we had installed previously. Next, we need to go ahead and grab our keys. We're going to click the web setup within the Firebase authentication section, and we're going to be able to grab our API keys, auth domain, database URL, all that information here, and then we're going to use that within the Firebase app. Once we have the keys, we can go ahead and drop in an instance of Firebase app into our shell and go ahead and add all of those keys into the configuration for it so that we can connect to our instance of Firebase later on. Now that we've got our Firebase app implemented, we need to add an instance of our Firebase auth element. We're going to go ahead and tag it with the ID auth so we can do a quick lookup later. And then in this case, since we only configured one provider, Google, we're just going to set it up for one instance of auth just for that provider. Now that we've got an instance of our auth element, we're going to want to go ahead and use it. In this case, I'm just grabbing it by ID and calling sign in with pop-up within the connected callback. Normally this functionality would be within some sort of on-click listener, so a sign in button, something along those lines. And you don't necessarily have to use the pop-up. There are other ways to sign in, such as passing a username and password, which is extremely useful for instances where you want an inline login system, especially if you're using an anonymous or an email-based login system. Here, I just want something quick and dirty to show that we can log in using our Google Auth provider that we previously had. Now we're going to test our application using the PolymerServe instance locally. As you can see on initial loading of the page, it goes ahead and launches the sign-in modal for Google, at which point we can sign in, and then within our app, we'd normally have some indicator showing that we're signed in. However, we haven't added one. So I'm just going to go straight to the Firebase auth element within the console, as you can see here. And then from there, we can go ahead and take a look at the properties on the Firebase auth. This is very simple in Chrome, just using the $0 and then we can check the signed in property. Now that we've got our basic application, we're going to go ahead and deploy it to Firebase. And we're going to do this using those npm commands that we'd set up previously. In this case, we're going to be using the deploy::hosting to set up the UI that we just finished building. Normally, you would want to go ahead and do the full deployment, but in this case, our database rules haven't been edited, so we're just going to deploy the assets needed for the front end and nothing else. So that wraps up my video for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave me feedback here on YouTube in the comments section, or you can find me on the Polymer Slack channel at @Murdoch. I've tried something different with how I'm doing the video this week, also how I'm recording the audio, so I hope it comes through a little bit clearer, and if you guys don't like it, just let me know and I'll go back to how it was, or see if I can find a different way that can record the video better than generating it off of pre-rendered images. And so for next week, I'm going to be talking about a new element I've created over the past roughly week. It's all focused on material design's breakpoints. And I hope you guys enjoy that one as well. It's also going to be touching on how to do unit testing through elements in the new system. I was hoping to wait until Polymer 3 got official release, but we're not quite there yet, so I'll have another video on that one later.